Howdy y'all, I am Ice Gold, and on the 1st of October, I uploaded a video talking about the barrier to entry that currently exists in PvP. It was the video that blew up my channel, and that tells me that this is an important topic that needs to be discussed more. The barrier to entry has gotten even higher since that video, and I'll go over the points from my first video on this topic as well as some new points that have come up in the months since then. In the old days, you used to be able to just rock about any pet body and do well. There were some that certainly helped, like I remember using the enchanted armament on my legendary death wizard so I could stack blades and whatnot and do the whole, poison headless wraith type thing. That was fun. But there weren't really any must-haves around, meaning you could use a triple W made for PvE and reasonably get away with it if you didn't want to run any wards. Nowadays though, for most schools, you need certain pet bodies and talents because they make you much more competitive in the arena. It can make a big difference depending on the pet body that you have. Ice really doesn't have much going for it right now, but with the Blimp Buddy, we can win the Bubble War pretty reliably, giving us an advantage in damage, which we desperately need. It gives 2 35% Bale Frosts, which is really, really important. Winning Bubble War can really help us out, even in all of our bad matchups. Storm absolutely needs the Stormy Null Dragon for its 3 Storm Elf cards, which allows them to create pressure very well as a school that desperately needs that kind of pressure due to their low number of utility spells. Their card library isn't really all that great, so having a pet that gives Storm Elves is really, really good. Schools like Fire, Myth, and Life all tend to run pets that give a bubble card to help in the aforementioned Bubble War. On my Fire, I run a Lord of Summer, which gives a 35 bubble. And on my Myth, I want to try to get a Mystic Sabertooth that gives a 25 bubble. And on my Life, I'm going to be trying to make a Leaf Foot for an extra Sanctuary. So all of that is really, really helpful in the Bubble War. Death Wizards will typically run the Gloomy Goatling for more threefold copies to help set up their gambits, or they'll use the Dread Quetzal like I do for the Pierce Aura cards that those give. Balances will typically use the Rain Beetle pet so they can break a shield and get a blade. Basically, every school has a specific pet body that really helps them become more competitive in PvP. Sometimes the pet card is literally like just by far your best move, and if you don't have it because you don't have the pet, it can lead to a loss sometimes. And I mean, y'all already know about the struggle that is making pets in this game. You have to pray that they get the 5 out of the 10 talents that you want, and oftentimes the pet will get anywhere from 1 to 4 of them before failing, quote unquote, wasting out all of your mega snacks that you dumped into making said pet. I think a talent reroll system would really be great. I think that would help this part of the barrier to entry tremendously. I think it would reduce it. And it would just be, good to do anyway for PvE players too, because when I was setting up to do PvP back in October, I had to make a whole new round of pets, which significantly pushed back the day of my first match in 3 years. Numerous mega fails, and not even being able to get a base made for a while in some situations. It was bad, and of course you need to have the best stats to be competitive in PvP these days. Every little thing matters, whether it's health, accuracy, pip chance, etc. And it used to not be like this. You could use a fail pet way back in the day and be fine, but now if you don't have that breaker proof defy dealer mighty giver pet, I'd say don't bother getting into the arena. Pets matter so much in this game, and they are arguably the most tedious and hardest pieces of gear to get. Speaking of gear, that is also extremely rough to get. After the Nightmare update dropped, the clothes and wands that became meta were extremely hard to get your hands on. I mentioned this in my video talking about the recent content creator discussion, but essentially, those pieces are locked behind the absolute worst things the game has to offer. The best hat for many schools is the Wastelander hat, which is locked behind a pack. It gives, a power pin and tons of pip chance, which is really, really important. Another alternative is the Dreamstalker hat, which is like Wastelander, but way more defense oriented. But that's locked behind Eating the Nightmare now 15 times. And, props to the devs for reducing the requirement from 25 down to 15, but let's be real, there's a fat chance of that hat dropping for your school before you hit run number 15. From there, you have the Burrower hat in 3rd place, which is locked behind a pack or a gold key boss. The pity system for General Lightbane is actually pretty good, but the fight itself is so annoying, and again, it's a gold key boss, so people aren't real excited to go farm that. And at this point, it's not really worth trying to look for like a fourth place option, because you're losing too much of, you know, like a given stat. You're probably thinking like, I could use the Reaver hat, question mark. And the Reaver hat really is good. It gives the most damage, I think the most pierce, and it gives accuracy and pip chance and some decent health as well to boot. But you lose out on shads using it, which is why people don't use it, and I'll get into why that's a huge problem in a moment. The best robe is now undeniably the Hun Hao males, which drop from the Crying Sky raid, and on top of that, you need an extra 17 shards to craft the 170 version after you somehow get it dropped in the raid, because they, for some reason, refuse to add like specific raid folders to Gwyn outside in the guild house. I don't need to talk about how, you know, getting into a guild also really raises the barrier to entry. This is like the main bulk of the barrier to entry. It's just getting into a guild and getting raid gear right now. And you know, like back to the 17 shards thing, that is a minimum of 3 wins, which not every guild can get, or a minimum of 2 more hits of the chest after beating Hun Hao, which is upcharged Dao, like 835 crowns to hit the chest the first time, and it doubles with every time, with every subsequent time. Could make a case that this is also pay to win. And the boots and the wands are the same story. It's Shabalba if you can afford to give up pip chance, and Hun Hao if you can't for the boots. Then it's Shabalba if you can afford to give up pip conversion, and Hun Hao if you can't for the wands. All 4 of these pieces give shadow pip rating, which has effectively thrown us right into a 4-piece shad meta again. The queue has been dead as a result of this. People not having raid gear don't have any better alternatives, so they just don't queue because that's a losing battle no matter the school. I mean, if if we're talking the Nightmare robe, for example, the Nightmare robe is so good, but it just doesn't give shads. So if you're 3-piece shad against 4-piece shad, 4-piece shad is gonna be able to pressure you a lot more effectively. You've gotta really be smart about it, but most of the time it's going to end in a loss, depending on your school, I guess, and how good of a game you are, and your deck RNG. There's also still things like the Skyfarer ring being required in some setups to hit max pip chance, or to give extra outgoing healing for Storm and Life, etc. And I am actually having to run suboptimal setups on my Ice and Fire right now because I don't hit max pips without the Skyfarer ring. Fortunately, you can farm Meowiarty rematches to get a free version of those, so if anyone is down to do those, feel free to join my Discord in the description below, and we can set up a time to go farm. Spell elements are another thing that's really gotten worse ever since their implementation. There's 2 colossal problems with them, and the first one is how many spell elements it costs to take a spell from tier 1 to tier 5. After unlocking the spell, it costs 75 spell elements to take it to tier 2, then 115 to tier 3, 195 to tier 4, and 305 to tier 5. It's a gap of 40, then 80, then 120 between each tier. This is excessive. It's especially bad when it comes to gold key bosses. You can't just sit there and farm them over and over if you don't have a surplus of gold keys, and the fact that key boss spells cost so many spell elements is something I could really never support. 685 spell elements equates to like more than 200 keys on just one boss, which, you know, I'll let you make your own conclusion on why that's bad, especially with how they've made gold keys so much harder to get. Used to be you could just farm Darkmoor and get plenty, but you know, honestly, I would be fine with the cost if you could still farm gold keys for free, but you can't, so whiz, I guess. On top of this, there are the Arc 1 spell elements. These spells are pretty much essential for PvP, depending on your school. You'll need at least one, no matter your school, but they also take 685 spell elements to max out. And you're probably thinking, you know, oh, tough, but at least it doesn't cost gold keys, right? And you're right. It does not cost 200 gold keys to max out these spells. What it does cost, however, is making a new wizard and keeping them in Dragonspire or early Celestia to be able to farm, because the spell elements themselves are badge locked. My account had every character over level 100 back when I started trying to get back into the game, so months ago, I had to buy an extra character slot and make a balance in order to farm spell elements. It's extremely expensive to get these spell elements from rematches, like the Meow Yardy one I mentioned before, so making a new character and farming a boss for an average of around 30 hours it was for my balance to get all the spell elements for Arc 1 is genuinely just more worth doing. The badge lock makes absolutely no sense to me. I understand the rationale for doing it because they want people at the level to farm them, but pretty much everyone farming them is doing it for their max level wizards for stuff like PvP, hence there's no reason for the badge lock to exist. This severely limits the accessibility, and since it already costs 685 to max out a spell, it would be a common sense change to remove the badge locks, especially with the Arc 2 spell limits on the horizon. Like, if we have to farm chrysalis bosses for those, you cannot seriously expect people to willingly farm 25k health bosses on level 100s. A smaller issue, but not much smaller, is Beast Moon spells. For whatever reason, there's a couple spells out where the base version of the spell is banned in PvP. An even smaller number of these spells can only be obtained via upgrading with spell limits that drop from Beast Moon. And like, I've talked before about how much I detest Beast Moon, so forcing people to do Beast Moon to get the spell elements to be able to use those cards in a PvP match or a raid, for example, I think that's not great. And like, I have talked at length before about how like these spell elements could come from tournaments if they ever brought them back, but I don't know, I'm keeping my hopes realistic on that one. Regenerate is the biggest offender here. I have not uploaded life PvP since November because I have yet to unlock Regenerate. I'm sure some of you have been wondering where that is, or it's like, why hasn't Gold uploaded life PvP? And that is why. Regenerate is an essential spell for life to have in their arsenal. And even just tier 2B would be fine with me, but having to get 75 spell elements from Beast Moon of all things is something I just really disagree with. I'd love to upload live PvP again, but Regenerate is so essential, and until I'm able to get my hands on a lot more spell elements, I probably won't be uploading any. There's also the whole thing with the big three, and when I say big three, I mean the three meta schools of Myth, Death, and Balance. So it's sort of like, is it worth it to put in all of this work that I've gone over already when, like, I'm not a meta school, for example? Big three schools, Myth, Death, and Balance, run the show at max level right now, having some of the strongest gambits, best stats, and most extensive utility in the game. There is such a massive gap in viability between Myth at third best and Life at fourth best, and the three elemental schools are nothing short of unplayable. If you are not one of those three schools, I genuinely would not recommend getting into PvP right now. It's just not worth all the effort. I've mentioned so much, the game can be fun, but only if you're one of the big three. And hopefully the devs put in some work in terms of balancing the big three, because there's no reason to play right now if you're not one of those. Per Rochambeau's introduction, which, knowing about all of that is another part of why the barrier to entry is so high now. There are counter matchups, but if you're in Ice, for example, Ice versus Myth, which is supposed to be a soft counter matchup, is a safe Myth matchup. There is literally no chance you can win playing traditionally against a good Myth. And Ice versus Death, which you're supposed to soft counter, is a likely death matchup. They'll win about 10 more games out of 100 than you. Meaning, even though Ice is supposed to win, Death still likely wins anyway because their stats and card library are just better. You definitely have a better chance against Death than some other schools, but it's still not great, and that's the reality all the non-meta schools face. The only unfavorable matchups the big three have are when they go up against each other. Like, Death versus Myth is supposed to have Myth hard countering, but if a Death plays it right, it's a tilt Death matchup. And like, if they don't stupidly go for an Oni when not being able to use shield gambits is why Ice always loses to Myth, they can win, like you're seeing right now. The bottom line is, despite the Rochambeau wheel's existence, and you think every school is supposed to counter and get countered by certain other schools and it's supposed to work like that, that's just not how it works. Rules for thee, but not for me, if you will. A lot of balancing changes need to be made before I would consider PvP even being worth getting into for a lot of people. And with everything I've said about the barrier to entry, it's just not worth your time as a player at the moment. It's harder than ever to get into PvP right now. There's stuff I didn't touch on, like having to grind to get specific pins, which fortunately isn't as hard as it used to be. So big ups to the devs on making the Wallaroo pity system the best they ever have. They really deserve like a standing ovation for doing the Wallaroo pity system. But you need those specific pins to, for example, not fizzle certain counters that you need to have. So if you're looking to get into it but haven't done, you know, all of the above, I'd recommend looking into doing other things in Wiz. That's not to say that it's impossible to get set up to do PvP, but it took me months to get there, back when 160 was the cap, so if you're an average player who doesn't put 16 hours a day into the game, it's going to take you a similar amount of time to get your characters ready. But those are just my takes on the barrier to entry in PvP at the moment. Agree, disagree, talk to me in the comments. I'm totally down to hear what y'all have to say. Communication is important, and I would, you know, love to talk to the devs about PvP and how to balance it better. But for now, I'm gonna end this off here. Thank y'all for watching. I've been Ice Cold. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave like 50 comments for the algorithm. My Discord is down in the description if you want to chat with me some more, and I will see y'all later.